Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Black Mountain. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. It was a damp April afternoon in 1949 when the Simmons family first laid eyes on the Victorian house that stood at the edge of Black Mountain. Robert Simmons, a 38-year-old accountant from Charlotte, had been looking for a fresh start after the war. His wife, Margaret, a former nurse with tired eyes and a gentle smile, had dreamed of mountain air to soothe her persistent cough. Their realtor, a thin-lipped local named Harold Davis, had shown them 3 other properties that day, but this one, with its sloping roof and wraparound porch overlooking the misty peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains, seemed to speak directly to something in Margaret. The house stood about 4 miles from the town center, where Cherry Street met an unnamed dirt road that wound upward through a copse of ancient oak trees. Built in 1903 by a railroad executive whose name had been all but forgotten in local memory, the house had changed hands 6 times in 46 years. Most recently, it had belonged to the Caldwell family who, according to Mr. Davis, had relocated rather suddenly to Florida the previous winter. "Price is well below market," Davis said, flipping through his paperwork as they stood in the spacious front parlor. The Caldwells were quite motivated sellers. Robert, ever the numbers man, raised an eyebrow. Motivated how? Davis cleared his throat. "Family matters, nothing to do with the property itself." He gestured to the bay windows that offered an unobstructed view of the surrounding forest. "You simply won't find another home with these features at this price point in Buncombe County." What the realtor didn't mention, what wasn't recorded in any of the official sale documents filed at the county courthouse, was that the Caldwells had left most of their furniture behind. This unusual detail was discovered by the Simmons family only after they had signed the closing papers in early May of 1949. When they arrived with their modest moving truck from Charlotte, they found the house still partially furnished, a dining table with 8 chairs, 3 beds with frames, a worn but serviceable sofa in the parlor, and various smaller items scattered throughout the home. "Maybe we should contact them," Margaret suggested, as they stood in the fully furnished master bedroom. "Return their things." Robert shook his head, running his hand along the ornate headboard. "Davis said it was part of the deal, said they didn't want to bother shipping it all to Florida." He smiled at his wife. "Their loss is our gain." This unusual beginning might have simply been an odd footnote in the family's history, were it not for what Margaret discovered 3 days after they moved in. According to statements later given to the local authorities, Margaret had been settling into her new home by giving it a thorough cleaning. The previous owners had left the place in reasonable condition, but she believed every new home deserved a fresh start. She began in the kitchen, moved methodically through the first floor, and then tackled the second floor with its 4 bedrooms and single bathroom. It wasn't until the 4th day that she ventured into the attic. The entrance to the attic was a small door at the end of the upstairs hallway, secured with a simple hook and eye latch. Margaret had to stand on a chair to reach it, and when she did, she noticed something unusual. The hook, though old and slightly rusted, like everything else in the house, showed signs of recent use. The eye into which it fit was polished from frequent movement. The attic door opened with a protesting groan, revealing a narrow wooden staircase that disappeared into darkness. Margaret found the pull string for the single light bulb that illuminated the space and climbed the stairs slowly, armed with her feather duster and a determined spirit. What she found in the attic would later be described in meticulous detail in her journal, a document that became central to the subsequent investigation. The attic was large, running the length and width of the house, with dormer windows at either end allowing thin streams of light to penetrate the gloom. Unlike the rest of the home, which had been at least partially cleared of personal items, the attic contained numerous trunks, boxes, and pieces of furniture, all draped with sheets that had once been white but had yellowed with age. Margaret moved through the space slowly, lifting sheets to reveal forgotten treasures, a rocking chair, a child's wooden train set, stacks of old magazines from the 1920s. It was when she reached the far corner of the attic, near the eastern dormer window, that she noticed something odd. The floorboards in this section appeared newer than the rest, less worn by time and footsteps, and there, partially obscured by a large steamer trunk, was what appeared to be a trapdoor. The journal entry dated May 9, 1949, reads, "Found something strange in the attic today, a section that seems to have been added later with a small door in the floor. Too heavy for me to lift alone. We'll show R when he returns from town." Robert Simmons returned from his errands in Black Mountain at approximately 4:30 that afternoon. According to his later testimony, his wife met him at the door with an unusual expression, part excitement, part apprehension. She led him immediately to the attic, pointing out her discovery without touching it herself. Together they moved the steamer trunk aside. The trapdoor was approximately 3 feet square, made of newer pine boards than the surrounding floor, with a small recessed handle. Robert gripped the handle and pulled. The door resisted at first, then gave way with a sudden release that sent him stumbling backward. A rush of stale, warm air escaped from the opening, and there it was, the detail that would transform this curious discovery into something far more disturbing. The space revealed beneath the trapdoor was not a storage compartment or a forgotten crawl space. It was a room, a small, fully furnished room with a cot, a chamber pot, a small table with a kerosene lamp, and a stack of books. The walls were lined with the same floral wallpaper that adorned the second-floor hallway of the main house, though faded and peeling in places. And on the cot lay a pillow with a distinct depression, as if someone had recently rested their head there. Robert immediately closed the trapdoor and secured it with the steamer trunk. That night, as recorded in Margaret's journal, they discussed their options in hushed tones at the kitchen table. "We should call the police," Margaret insisted. Robert was more hesitant. "And tell them what? That we found a hidden room? It's strange, yes, but not necessarily criminal. It looks lived in, Robert. Recently lived in. Perhaps the Caldwells had a relative staying there temporarily. An elderly parent, maybe? In a secret room in the attic? Without proper ventilation or plumbing?" Robert had no answer for that. They agreed to wait one day to see if there were any other signs of recent occupation in the house. In retrospect, this decision would prove to be their first critical mistake. That night, Margaret noted in her journal that she had difficulty sleeping, kept hearing creaks and groans from above. "R says it's just the house settling, but I'm not convinced. The noises seem too deliberate." The following morning, Robert left for Black Mountain to inquire discreetly about the previous owners. According to town records, he visited the post office first, where he asked if there was any forwarding address for the Caldwells. The postmaster, Ellis Jameson, informed him that no such request had been filed. Robert then made his way to the office of the Black Mountain News, where he reviewed back issues from the previous winter, looking for any mention of the Caldwell family's departure. What he found instead was far more disturbing. There was no mention of the Caldwells moving to Florida. In fact, there was no mention of the Caldwells at all after November of 1948. The last reference to the family was a brief notice about their daughter Eleanor winning a prize at the Swannanoa Valley Autumn Harvest Festival. While Robert conducted his investigation in town, Margaret remained at the house, continuing her cleaning efforts on the ground floor. According to her journal, at approximately 11:15 that morning, she heard a distinct sound from the second floor, a door closing. She froze, feather duster in hand, and listened. The sound was not repeated. Gathering her courage, Margaret climbed the stairs to the second floor. All doors appeared to be in the same positions she had left them. She checked each room methodically, finding nothing out of place. When she reached the end of the hallway, however, she noticed that the hook securing the attic door was no longer in its eye. The door itself remained closed, but it was no longer latched. Margaret's journal entry for that day reads, "I know I secured that latch this morning. R thinks I'm being forgetful, but I'm certain of it. Something isn't right in this house. That evening, Robert shared what he had learned, or rather, what he had failed to learn, about the Caldwells. The couple agreed that first thing the next morning, they would contact the realtor for more information about the previous owners. They never got the chance. According to police reports, at approximately 2:17 in the morning, Margaret Simmons awoke to the sound of footsteps in the attic. She nudged her husband awake, and they both lay in tense silence, listening to the unmistakable sound of someone moving about overhead. The footsteps crossed from one end of the attic to the other, paused, then began to descend the attic stairs. Robert reached for the baseball bat he had placed beside the bed after their discovery the previous day. Margaret, according to her journal, clutched the bed sheets so tightly her knuckles turned white. They watched in horror as their bedroom doorknob began to turn slowly. The door opened just enough for a sliver of the darkened hallway to become visible. Robert later described seeing a shadow move within that darkness, though he couldn't make out any distinct figure. He called out, "Who's there?" The door immediately closed, and the footsteps retreated rapidly up the attic stairs. Robert pursued, baseball bat in hand, but by the time he reached the attic, there was no sign of any intruder. The dormer windows were sealed shut, their latches rusted with age and disuse. The trapdoor in the corner remained covered by the steamer trunk, apparently undisturbed. The couple spent the remainder of the night in their car, parked at the end of their driveway. At first light, Robert drove to the Black Mountain Police Station to report the incident. He spoke with Sheriff Thomas Watkins, who agreed to send a deputy to investigate. Deputy Carl Mosley arrived at the Simmons residence at 9:45 that morning. His official report states that he conducted a thorough search of the premises, including the attic and the hidden room beneath the trapdoor. He found no signs of forced entry and no evidence of anyone currently living in the hidden space, though he noted that the cot and other furnishings appeared to be relatively well maintained considering their apparent age. The deputy's most significant finding, however, came when he examined the exterior of the house. On the eastern side, partially obscured by a large rhododendron bush, he discovered a small, narrow window approximately 7 feet above ground level. This window, which had been painted shut, aligned perfectly with the location of the hidden room in the attic. From the outside, it appeared to be simply another attic window, indistinguishable from the others except for its smaller size. "Looks like someone could come and go without using the main attic access," Deputy Mosley noted in his report, "though they'd need a ladder, and it doesn't appear the window's been opened in some time." Despite the deputy's thorough investigation, no conclusive evidence of a current intruder was found. He advised the Simmons family to change all the locks and to secure the attic door with a padlock rather than the simple hook and eye latch. He also suggested they might want to seal up the hidden room entirely. Robert followed this advice immediately, driving into town that same day to purchase new locks and a sturdy padlock. By nightfall, every exterior door had a new lock, and the attic door was secured with both the padlock and a chair wedged beneath the knob. The trapdoor in the attic was nailed shut, with the steamer trunk placed on top for good measure. These precautions seemed to work for exactly 3 nights. On the 4th night, May 14, 1949, both Robert and Margaret were awakened by a sound they would later describe as scratching coming from within the walls of their bedroom. "Like fingernails," Margaret wrote in her journal, "like someone trying to claw their way out or in." Robert inspected the walls but found nothing unusual. The scratching continued intermittently until dawn, then ceased. That day, Robert contacted a local carpenter, Vernon Miller, to inspect the house for possible animal infestations. Miller found no evidence of rodents or other wildlife that might explain the sounds, but he did make a discovery that would add another layer to the unfolding mystery. While examining the eastern wall of the master bedroom, Miller noticed that the baseboard didn't quite meet the wall in one section. Upon closer inspection, he found that a 2-foot section of the baseboard could be removed entirely, revealing a narrow passage between the exterior and interior walls. This passage, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways, appeared to connect to similar gaps in the walls throughout the house, creating a network of hidden corridors. "It's not uncommon in these older homes," Miller explained to the increasingly disturbed couple. "They often left spaces for insulation or running new pipes later on, but these seem deliberately connected, almost like someone modified them to move through the house unseen." Robert paid Miller for his time and asked him not to mention what he had found to anyone in town. That evening, the couple sat at their kitchen table, Margaret's journal open before them, and tried to make sense of their situation. "We should leave," Margaret said simply. "Something isn't right here." Robert, however, was reluctant. They had invested nearly all their savings in the house, and moving twice in such a short time would be financially devastating. "Let's give it one more week," he suggested. "If anything else happens, we'll contact Sheriff Watkins again." That night, they pushed their bedroom dresser in front of the loose baseboard section and once again wedged a chair beneath the doorknob. Despite these precautions, both reported being awakened multiple times by sounds from within the walls. Not scratching this time, but what Margaret described in her journal as whispering. The next morning, Margaret discovered something that finally convinced Robert they needed to take more decisive action. While making their bed, she found a small piece of paper that had been slipped beneath her pillow. On it, written in shaky pencil, were the words, "This is still our home." Robert immediately called Sheriff Watkins, who arrived with Deputy Mosley and another officer within the hour. They conducted another thorough search of the premises, paying particular attention to the hidden passages within the walls. Their investigation revealed something the carpenter had missed: a small opening in the floor of the hidden room in the attic that connected to the network of wall passages. Someone could move from the attic room down through the walls to almost any part of the house, Sheriff Watkins explained, his expression grave. And based on the dust patterns, someone has been doing exactly that, and recently. The sheriff suggested posting an officer outside the house for a few nights, to which the Simmons readily agreed. Deputy Mosley volunteered for the first watch, parking his patrol car at the end of the driveway with a clear view of the house. Nothing unusual occurred that night nor the next when another deputy took the watch. On the third night, May 17th, Officer James Porter was on duty. According to his report, at approximately 1:20 in the morning, he observed a figure moving along the eastern side of the house. Believing it to be an intruder, he approached cautiously, his hand on his holstered weapon. The figure, described as slight of build, possibly female, disappeared around the back of the house. Porter pursued but found no one. A thorough search of the property's perimeter revealed no signs of anyone having fled through the surrounding woods. Officer Porter immediately woke the Simmons and, with their permission, entered the house to check for any signs of intrusion. The exterior doors remained locked, the attic door secure with its padlock intact. However, when they checked the hidden room in the attic, they made a chilling discovery. The cot, which had been bare since Deputy Mosley's first investigation, now held a pillow and neatly folded blanket. On the small table beside it was a framed photograph that neither the Simmons nor any of the officers had seen before, a family portrait showing a middle-aged couple and a young woman of perhaps 20, all dressed in clothing from the early 1940s. On the back of the frame was written, "The Caldwells, 1943. This discovery prompted Sheriff Watkins to launch a more formal investigation into the whereabouts of the Caldwell family. Records from the county courthouse confirmed that Samuel and Eleanor Caldwell, along with their daughter Rebecca, had indeed sold the house to the Simmons through Harold Davis's real estate agency in January of 1949. However, attempts to contact them at their supposed Florida address proved fruitless. The address did not exist. Harold Davis, when questioned by the sheriff, appeared genuinely confused. He claimed to have handled the sale through correspondence only, never meeting the Caldwells in person. The family had initially contacted his office by mail, expressing their desire to sell the property quickly. All paperwork had been completed via mail, with signatures notarized in Florida, and returned. The payment for the house had been directed to a bank account in Jacksonville, which, upon investigation, had been closed in February of 1949, just weeks after the sale was completed. As these inquiries were underway, the Simmons continued to experience disturbing incidents in the house. Margaret's journal entries from this period detail objects being moved when no one was looking, doors that had been closed found open, and continued sounds of movement within the walls, primarily at night. Most disturbing were the occasional glimpses of what she described as a female figure, seen briefly at the end of hallways or through windows from the outside, always vanishing when approached. On May 20th, Robert Simmons returned home from a meeting with Sheriff Watkins to find his wife in a state of extreme distress. According to his statement, Margaret had been in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard footsteps on the back porch. Thinking it was Robert returning, she opened the back door, only to find herself face to face with a young woman she had never seen before. The woman, described as being in her early 20s with long dark hair and wearing a faded blue dress, had simply stared at Margaret without speaking, then turned and walked into the woods behind the house. Margaret had been too shocked to follow or call out. The description matched the young woman in the Caldwell family photograph found in the attic room. Sheriff Watkins organized a search of the surrounding forest, but found no sign of the mysterious woman. That night, despite the continued police presence outside the house, both Robert and Margaret reported hearing footsteps in the attic and whispered conversations that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. When Deputy Mosley entered to investigate, the sound ceased immediately. By this point, news of the strange occurrences had begun to spread throughout Black Mountain. According to archives from the local newspaper, several longtime residents came forward with information about the Caldwell family that added new complexity to the unfolding mystery. Samuel Caldwell, it was revealed, had been a mechanical engineer who moved his family to Black Mountain from Pittsburgh in 1939. He had worked briefly for the Southern Railway before falling ill with what was described as a nervous condition in 1944. His wife, Eleanor, had been a piano teacher, giving lessons in their home to children from Black Mountain and the surrounding areas. Their daughter, Rebecca, born in 1928, had been described by former classmates as quiet and intensely private. The most significant testimony came from Helen Marshfield, a neighbor who lived about a quarter-mile down the road from the Caldwell house. According to Mrs. Marshfield, the Caldwells had become increasingly reclusive after Samuel's illness. Eleanor had stopped giving piano lessons, and Rebecca had withdrawn from the local school to be educated at home. By 1947, Mrs. Marshfield reported rarely seeing any member of the family in town. The last time I saw any of them was November of '48, Mrs. Marshfield told Sheriff Watkins. I ran into Eleanor at the general store. She seemed nervous, kept looking over her shoulder. When I asked after Samuel and Rebecca, she just said they were resting at home and changed the subject. No one in Black Mountain recalled seeing the family pack up or move away. They had simply stopped appearing in town, and eventually their house had gone up for sale. Based on this information, Sheriff Watkins expanded his investigation, contacting authorities in Florida to help locate the Caldwells. Meanwhile, the Simmons family, now thoroughly frightened, made the decision to temporarily relocate to a boarding house in town while the investigation continued. It was during their absence from the house that the most disturbing discovery was made. On May 23rd, while conducting another thorough search of the property, Deputy Mosley decided to examine the basement more carefully. The basement of the house was only partially finished, with a dirt floor in some areas and rough stone walls. In the northeast corner, behind an old coal furnace, the deputy noticed that the stone wall didn't look quite right. Some of the stones appeared to have been removed and replaced. With the help of two other officers, Mosley began removing the loose stones. Behind them, they found a small space about 4 feet deep and 3 feet wide. And there, wrapped in what appeared to be bed sheets, were the remains of 3 individuals. Forensic examination would later confirm that these were the bodies of Samuel, Eleanor, and Rebecca Caldwell. They had been dead for approximately 6 months, placing their deaths around November or December of 1948. The cause of death for Samuel and Eleanor appeared to be blunt force trauma to the head. Rebecca's cause of death was less clear, though the medical examiner noted signs of prolonged malnutrition prior to death. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community and transformed what had been a strange haunting into a multiple homicide investigation. Yet, even as authorities worked to piece together what had happened to the Caldwells, the mystery of who had been living in the house, moving through its walls, leaving notes, and appearing to Margaret Simmons on the back porch, deepened. Sheriff Watkins's leading theory was that someone known to the Caldwells had murdered them, concealed their bodies in the basement wall, and then continued to live in the house, hiding in the attic room and wall passages whenever necessary. This person had then orchestrated the fraudulent sale of the house to the Simmons family, possibly out of financial necessity, but had been unwilling or unable to leave the property. This theory seemed to be confirmed when investigators discovered a series of journals hidden in a cavity beneath the floorboards of the attic room. These journals, filled with increasingly erratic handwriting, appeared to have been written by Rebecca Caldwell over a period of several years. The final entries, dated November 1948, described growing tensions within the family and Rebecca's feelings of being trapped and controlled by her parents. The very last entry read simply, "They'll never let me leave this house, so they'll have to leave instead." Despite an extensive manhunt and investigation, Rebecca Caldwell, assuming she was indeed alive and the author of the journals, was never found. The prevailing theory became that she had killed her parents in November of 1948, hidden their bodies in the basement wall, and then continued to live secretly in the house even after selling it to the Simmons family. The woman Margaret Simmons had seen on the back porch was presumed to be Rebecca, perhaps making a final visit to the house before disappearing for good. Some in Black Mountain, however, questioned whether Rebecca could have been responsible. Her former teachers described her as shy and withdrawn, but never violent, and some aspects of the mystery remained unexplained, particularly how she could have orchestrated the sale of the house, creating false documentation and correspondence from Florida. The Simmons family never returned to live in the house. They sold it at a significant loss in June of 1949 to a real estate developer who promptly had it torn down. The property remained vacant for nearly a decade before new construction began on the site. For years afterward, residents of Black Mountain whispered about the Caldwell murders, and local teenagers would dare each other to spend the night on the vacant lot where the house had once stood. Some claimed to hear whispering voices or see the figure of a young woman moving among the trees at the edge of the property. In 1967, a reporter from the Asheville Citizen-Times attempted to track down Rebecca Caldwell as part of a retrospective on unsolved crimes in western North Carolina. The investigation led to a small town in Georgia, where a woman matching Rebecca's description had lived briefly in 1950 before disappearing again. Beyond that, the trail went cold. What truly happened in that house on the edge of Black Mountain remains a mystery to this day. Were the Caldwells victims of their disturbed daughter, who then haunted the house out of some twisted attachment? Or was there another explanation for the strange occurrences witnessed by the Simmons family? One final chilling detail emerged years later. When Margaret Simmons's journal was donated to the Swannanoa Valley Museum by her son following her death in 1970. The very last entry, dated May 21, 1949, just 2 days before the discovery of the bodies, contained a description of a dream Margaret had experienced the night before. In this dream, she wrote, she found herself in the hidden room in the attic, sitting on the cot. Across from her sat the young woman she had seen on the back porch. She spoke to me in the dream, Margaret wrote. She said, they wouldn't let me leave, so I made them part of the house instead. Now they'll never leave, and neither will I. When I asked what she meant, she smiled and said, look at the walls, Mrs. Simmons. Look at what they're made of now. Whether this was simply a nightmare born of stress and fear or something more prophetic, we may never know. The Caldwell house is long gone, its secrets buried beneath new construction. But in Black Mountain, some still claim that on quiet nights, if you stand on the property where the house once stood, you can hear whispers coming from beneath the ground, whispers that sound eerily like a family argument that will never be resolved. In 1958, when the new house was being constructed on the property, workers reportedly discovered something unusual in the soil, fragments of bone mixed with the dirt, too small and scattered to be identified conclusively. The construction continued nevertheless, and the new house stands there to this day. Its current owners have reported no unusual disturbances, at least not yet. The case of the Simmons family and the former owners living in their attic remains one of the most disturbing incidents in the history of Black Mountain. It serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not supernatural entities, but human beings driven to darkness by forces we may never fully understand. The Caldwell murders case was officially closed in 1962, with Rebecca Caldwell listed as the presumed perpetrator, status unknown. No further evidence has emerged in the decades since, and those who were directly involved in the investigation have long since passed away. All that remains are the records, the memories of long-time Black Mountain residents, and the persistent whispers about the house where the walls had ears, and perhaps, for a time, eyes as well. The Simmons family relocated permanently to Raleigh after their ordeal, never again living in a house older than they were. Robert Simmons passed away in 1974, and Margaret in 1970, having never spoken publicly about their experience beyond their official statements to the authorities. Their son, James, born 2 years after they left Black Mountain, grew up knowing nothing of the incident until he discovered his mother's journal among her possessions after her death. "My parents never talked about Black Mountain," he told the Citizen-Times in a 1985 interview. "Now I understand why." When asked if he believed his parents' account of what happened in that house on the edge of town, James Simmons was quiet for a long moment. "I believe they experienced something that terrified them," he said finally. Whether it was Rebecca Caldwell living in the walls or something else entirely, some questions are better left unanswered. Perhaps he's right. Or perhaps the truth is still out there, waiting to be discovered, like a hidden room behind a seemingly solid wall. Many houses hold secrets. Some hide them in plain sight. Others bury them deep beneath layers of history and denial. The house on the edge of Black Mountain held its secrets in its very bones, in the spaces between walls where whispers could travel, in the hidden passages where a desperate young woman may have plotted the unthinkable, and ultimately in the cold earth of its basement where a family's tragic end remained concealed until chance and circumstance brought it to light. In the quiet town of Black Mountain, nestled in the shadow of the towering peaks for which it was named, life continued. The train still arrived and departed from the station, built in 1909. Tourists still came to escape the summer heat of faraway cities. Children still attended school and played in the streets. But for those who remembered the spring of 1949, the town would never be quite the same. They had glimpsed something dark beneath the surface of their peaceful community, a reminder that even in the most idyllic settings, darkness can take root and grow. And sometimes that darkness remains, long after those who created it are gone. The house is gone now, replaced by something newer, brighter. The land has been reshaped, the trees that once shadowed the property, cut down and replaced. Nothing remains to mark what happened there except the memories of those few still living who remember, and the occasional curious visitor who has read about the case and comes to stand on the sidewalk looking up at where the attic windows once were, wondering. If the current residents of the property know its history, they don't speak of it. Perhaps that's wise. Some stories are better left untold, some memories better left undisturbed. Like the hidden passages in the walls of that long-gone house, some things are meant to remain in darkness. But for those of us who study the hidden corners of history, who seek to understand the darkness that sometimes dwells in the human heart. The case of the Simmons family and the house on the edge of Black Mountain remains a haunting reminder of how fragile the barriers can be between past and present, between life and death, between the safe, comfortable homes we create for ourselves and the unknown that lurks just on the other side of the wall. Listen closely in the quiet hours when the world holds its breath. Can you hear it? The whispers in the walls, the footsteps in the attic, the gentle creak of a door that should be locked but somehow isn't. Someone is in your house, someone who was there before you came and who never truly left, someone who believes with all their heart that this is still their home. A postscript to this story. In 1969, a woman was admitted to the State Psychiatric Hospital in Morganton, approximately 30 miles from Black Mountain. Her admission papers listed her name as Jane Doe, as she carried no identification and refused to provide her real name. She was estimated to be in her early 40s, suffered from severe paranoia and delusions, and claimed repeatedly that they had sealed her family into the walls of their home. Hospital records indicate that she died in 1971 from pneumonia, still unidentified. A nurse who had attended her in her final days reported that her last coherent words were, "I'd never left the house. I'm still there, in the walls, in the attic, in the basement. It's still my home." Was this woman Rebecca Caldwell? We may never know. The records from the hospital provide no photographs, and her remains were buried in an unmarked grave in the hospital cemetery. Like so many aspects of this disturbing case, her true identity remains yet another unanswered question, another whisper from the past that fades away just as we strain to hear it more clearly. In Black Mountain, life goes on. The mountains stand watch as they have for millions of years, indifferent to the brief, tumultuous lives of those who dwell in their shadow. The mist rolls down from the peaks in the early morning, shrouding the town in a ghostly white veil that burns away with the rising sun. And in a house that no longer exists, on a property that has been transformed by time and human hands, the echoes of a family's destruction continue to resonate, heard now only in the telling and retelling of their story. This has been the case of the Simmons family and the house on the edge of Black Mountain. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying thing is not what might be hiding in your house, but who, and the lengths to which they might go to ensure they never have to leave. Perhaps the most haunting question that remains is not what happened to the Caldwells, or even who was responsible for their deaths, but why the house itself seemed to facilitate such horror. The network of passages within the walls, the hidden room in the attic, the basement with its loose stones, all these elements existed before the tragedy unfolded. They were designed and built by someone with concealment in mind. According to records at the Swannanoa Valley Museum, the house was constructed in 1903 by Edward Whitley, an executive with the Western North Carolina Railroad. Whitley was known to be an eccentric man with a particular interest in unusual architectural features. His design for the house, with its maze-like interior and hidden spaces, was apparently inspired by similar features he had observed in older homes in New England. What is less well documented is why Whitley felt the need for such features in his mountain retreat. Some accounts suggest he was paranoid about potential labor unrest related to the railroad and wanted escape routes and hiding places should his home ever be targeted by disgruntled workers. Others propose more mundane explanations, that the passages were initially designed for household staff to move through the house unobtrusively, a common feature in larger homes of the period. Whitley lived in the house for only 7 years before selling it and moving to Florida, a curious parallel to the fabricated story about the Caldwells' departure. After Whitley, the house changed hands multiple times, with no owners staying longer than a decade. Records indicate that several owners reported dissatisfaction with the property, though specific complaints were rarely documented. One exception was found in a letter dated 1924, written by then-owner William Hargrove to his sister in Richmond. In it, he mentioned strange acoustics in the house, noting that conversations held in one room can sometimes be heard quite clearly in another distant part of the house, as if the walls themselves were conducting the sound. Hargrove sold the property the following year. By the time the Caldwells purchased the house in 1939, its unusual features were well established, though perhaps not fully understood by its new owners. Did Rebecca Caldwell discover the network of passages gradually, or was she shown them by her father? Did the house's secrets contribute to Samuel Caldwell's nervous condition or to Rebecca's increasing isolation? These questions remain unanswered. What we do know is that the house's design created the perfect environment for concealment and deception. It allowed someone, presumably Rebecca, to continue living there unseen even after the property had been sold to a new family. The walls that should have provided security instead harbored a threat. The home that should have been a sanctuary became a prison, first for the Caldwells, then for the Simmons. This pattern of concealment and revelation runs throughout the case. The Caldwells concealed their increasing isolation from the community. Rebecca, if the prevailing theory is correct, concealed her parents' deaths and her continued presence in the house. The house itself concealed secrets within its very structure, and even now, decades later, the full truth remains partially concealed, hidden in the gaps of the historical record. The story of the Simmons family and their brief, terrifying time in Black Mountain serves as a reminder of how little we sometimes know about the spaces we inhabit and the people who inhabited them before us. Every house has a history. Every wall has a story to tell. Sometimes, if we listen closely enough, we can hear those stories whispering to us in the quiet hours of the night. For those who remember Black Mountain in the spring of 1949, the lesson was clear. Not all hauntings are supernatural. Sometimes the most terrifying presence is that of another human being, desperate, disturbed, and determined to remain where they believe they belong, regardless of the cost. The Simmons family fled, never to return. The Caldwells remained, their bodies eventually discovered and properly buried in the local cemetery. And Rebecca, if indeed she was the young woman in the faded blue dress, the author of the hidden journals, the figure glimpsed briefly at the ends of hallways, Rebecca remained a ghost long before her death, moving unseen through the spaces between walls, watching through hidden peepholes, listening to conversations not meant for her ears. In the end, perhaps she got what she wanted. In one way or another, she never left that house on the edge of Black Mountain. Whether in body, in memory, or in the retelling of this dark chapter in the town's history, Rebecca Caldwell achieved a kind of immortality, becoming one with the house that she could not bear to leave. The property where the house once stood has a new address now, a new number on a different street. Its current residents go about their lives, probably unaware of what transpired on that spot more than 70 years ago. The earth has long since absorbed whatever physical evidence might have remained of the Caldwell family's final days. But stories endure. They pass from generation to generation, sometimes growing, sometimes diminishing, but always preserving some kernel of truth about the human experience, about our capacity for both creation and destruction, for both love and violence. So the next time you find yourself lying awake in the dark, listening to the creaks and groans of your house as it settles, remember the Simmons family and their brief stay in Black Mountain. Remember that houses have memories. Remember that walls can hide more than just insulation and wiring. And remember that sometimes, when you hear whispers in the night, it might not be just your imagination. Sometimes, someone might be whispering back. A collection of papers related to the case, including Margaret Simmons's journal and the official police reports, is held in the archives of the Swannanoa Valley Museum. They are not available for public viewing, but serious researchers may apply for access through the museum's director. The property itself remains privately owned. Out of respect for the current residents, who have no connection to these events, the exact address has been withheld from this account. As for Rebecca Caldwell, If she did indeed survive beyond 1949, no confirmed trace of her has ever been found. Some investigators have suggested she may have changed her identity and started a new life elsewhere. Others believe she never left western North Carolina, perhaps living quietly in one of the surrounding communities under an assumed name. The most persistent theory, however, is that she never left the property at all, that somewhere in the chaos of the investigation, the demolition of the house and the subsequent construction, some evidence was overlooked. Perhaps some whisper she found one final hiding place, one last secret the old house had to offer, and there she remains to this day, part of the foundation of whatever stands there now. It is, of course, merely speculation. The rational mind rejects such notions as fantasy. But in Black Mountain, when the mist rolls down from the peaks and the shadows grow long, rationality sometimes gives way to older, deeper ways of understanding the world. In those moments, the barrier between past and present feels thin indeed, and the stories of those who came before us, their lives, their deaths, their unresolved conflicts, seem to press against that barrier, seeking acknowledgement, seeking resolution, seeking, perhaps, some form of release. For the Caldwell family, that release never came. Their story remains unfinished, their deaths imperfectly explained, their presence in Black Mountain's history a dark stain that has never fully faded, and perhaps that is why their story continues to fascinate and disturb us decades later. We are drawn to its mysteries, to its unanswered questions, to the sense that somewhere, somehow, Rebecca Caldwell is still waiting to be found. Listen closely. Can you hear her? Can you hear the whispers in the walls? This is still her home. And perhaps, in some sense, it always will be. In the words of Margaret Simmons, written in her journal on that last night before they fled the house for good, this place remembers, and it will not let us forget. The mountains of western North Carolina keep their secrets well. The forests that cloak their slopes have witnessed countless human dramas over the centuries, from the Cherokee who first inhabited these valleys to the settlers who displaced them, to the visitors and residents who now call this beautiful, mysterious region home. The story of the Simmons family and the house on the edge of Black Mountain is just one such drama, a brief but intense moment in the long history of this place. Yet it serves as a reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind the most ordinary facades, the secrets that can hide within the most familiar spaces. It reminds us to look more closely at our surroundings, to listen more carefully to the stories of those who came before us, and perhaps, occasionally, to wonder what might be moving just on the other side of our walls. For in Black Mountain, as in so many places with long and complex histories, the line between past and present is never quite as solid as we might wish it to be. The dead do not always rest easy. And sometimes, when we think we are alone in our homes, we are actually sharing them with those who came before, those who, for reasons we may never fully understand, have decided that they never want to leave. If you find yourself in Black Mountain, take a moment to look toward the towering peaks for which the town was named. Think of the countless human stories that have unfolded in their shadow. And perhaps, if you listen very carefully, you might hear a whisper carried on the mountain breeze, a whisper that sounds almost like a young woman's voice, repeating the words she allegedly wrote in that final journal entry so many years ago. This is still our home.